to the AT&T CyberThreat Report for May 3rd, 2012. Today, joining me is Dave Gross, Senior Incident Response Analyst. Dave, what are you going to talk about today?
Well, thanks, Jim. I'm going to talk about a vulnerability in Skype. It's a slight vulnerability that allows people to track IP addresses of other Skype users.
Okay, sounds interesting. Also today, joining us for the first time is Dan Rubin. He's a member of the technical staff here and the co-producer of the CyberThreat Report. Welcome, Dan.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim. I don't have any specific topics today, but I will be chipping in questions as frequently as I can.
Okay. And I'm Jim Clausing, and I've got a couple of things that I wanted to talk about today. U.S. CERT alert that came out today, some new developments with Android malware, and a very abbreviated internet weather report today. So with that, talk to me about Skype, Dave.
Okay, well, thanks, Jim. Basically, this week what happened was there was code posted and instructions which allows you to get the IP address and ports that are in use of any Skype user that's online. The significant thing about this is that you don't have to make a call to the user. They don't have to be in your address book. And the user doesn't have any knowledge that this is going on behind the scenes. And with the IP address there, you can go and get geolocation information, so you can actually, in a coarse way, track the location data of Skype users. And, as they change places, as they move their laptop from place to place or whatever, you're able to see where they are. It's not clear from the information disclosed if the corporate version of Skype is vulnerable to this information disclosure, but there have been several security researchers that have tested it, and it does in fact work. The information disclosed, meaning the IP address, location, the ports, could be valuable also as information for planning targeted attacks against, perhaps an executive or, as somewhat of the beginning of an APT threat. So this stuff is, while it doesn't immediately present a danger to the PC that the user is using to run Skype, it still does pose a potential danger to the user themselves if somebody wanted to physically find the user or potentially try to craft some attacks for them.
So this is only.
Go ahead.
So this is only for people who have the application running, right? It's not just having the Skype installed on your machine that leaves you vulnerable.
That's right. If evidently, if you turn off the Skype software when you're not using it, the information isn't available. So it's only available when the application is turned on and active. Also, there were some researchers, both at the French Research Institute in INERIA, and the Polytechnic Institute of NYU, that had discovered this vulnerability back in 2010, around the end of the year there in November, and notified Skype of this. And then in 2011, evidently, they published a report where they had done some tracking at the city level of 10,000 Skype users for 2 weeks. And, I guess they were showing how this vulnerability could be used in a, somewhat malicious way. But the difference now is that, before it was just kind of reported in directly to Skype, and it was held kind of quiet, and then when they were published, I don't know that they actually disclosed how the thing was done, but now the vulnerability is out, and there's an exploit out there. And there's a website, so if you don't want to actually use the special version of Skype that you need to use in order to get at this information and then do some of the patching, like changing registry settings and stuff like that, there's evidently a website that you can just go to and type the Skype user's ID, and if they're online, if they've got their Skype software running, it'll give you all the information that you could get through that other method.
So what do you do if you're a Skype user and you're running the program all day long and you don't want to be exposed to this? Is there a patch available, or is it still forthcoming?
No workaround right now. Skype has just said that they're working on it, and there's nothing that sounds like it's forthcoming anytime soon.
Okay. Is this only the most recent version, like Skype 5, or does it affect all of the older versions as well?
They weren't specific about that, so it may affect all versions of Skype.
That's my understanding. I think it affects all of them.
Okay, so if you're running a large number of Skype users in your enterprise, there's really no way to avoid this right now.
I'm not sure what the root cause of the vulnerability is, so it's not clear how difficult it is to patch it and whether it's going to take a patch on every system, so it may still be out there for quite a while.
Well, thanks, Dave. That was great, but
sure.
Hate having that kind of capability in the hands of stalkers.
Yep.
Well, is it really, before we move on, is it really that particular, can people really get that close using just the IP information? Dave, you had mentioned that it also may expose what ports are open on a machine, which can cause the problem. But just knowing an IP address, are you going to be able to get that good of an idea where the people are, or is it still just pretty general?
It sounded like, based on what the researchers were saying, that they were able to locate them within like a mile or two, depending on what's known in the geolocation databases.
Okay. Well, next I wanted to talk about an alert that U.S. CERT published today, actually, about a vulnerability in the PHP CGI script that a pretty standard part of PHP, and a lot of sites have it installed. This one was reported to the PHP developers just in the last couple of days, and it was going to be kept quiet. It was inadvertently released by the discoverers. So now the U.S. CERT is alerting, and the developers are scrambling. Basically, the vulnerability was with a certain switch, as shown in the alert here. You could display a lot of information about the underlying server. Basically, if you don't need to be running PHP CGI, move it, disable it. If you are running it, at this point in time, there are no workarounds that I'm aware of. Hopefully, the developers will quickly release a patch. But this is another one of those, sort of like the Oracle one that we talked about last week, that researcher that discovered it reported it responsibly, and then understanding or accident, released the details to the public and made it a lot higher visibility than it would have otherwise been.
And Jim, when you say it can reveal information about the server, what kind of info are we talking about?
Well, it can reveal a lot of information about the particulars of the versions of the software that are installed. There are some reports that you may even be able to do some code execution depending on what other information is revealed there.
And it looks like it's not a difficult exploit either. It's just adding a query string to the end of a URL, right?
It is. It's a very specific query string to the URL. Will get you information on the server installation, which may then, show places where you could do code injection, page injection, or potentially command execution. So yeah, it's very simple. That's why there are high hopes that it'll be patched relatively quickly. Since I had mentioned the Oracle thing from last week, one new development since our last show, Oracle has now changed their license agreements and made the advanced security option available to everybody. That was one of the workarounds, one of the few workarounds if you were doing a load balanced setup. One of the few workarounds was the advanced security option to encrypt the traffic, but that was a pay extra feature. Last week, they've made that now available for free for all the Oracle installations. So,
yeah, it almost seems to me like this could be some pretty good motivation for some sysadmins to have to upgrade their servers or install their security patches. If you have to run in PHP CGI, you're pretty much stuck with making sure you're up to date. Otherwise, you're revealing your vulnerabilities to anyone who wants to take a look.
Yeah, and like I said, with this one, there isn't a patch yet, so you're kind of stuck with this one. So hopefully the patch will be out soon.
Yeah, although unfortunately, it seems like even without this, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that are found and a lot of websites broken into.
Yeah, with any complex piece of software, there are lots of potential avenues for exploitation, lots of potential undiscovered vulnerabilities. So.
And also PHP is kind of a favorite of people who want to do that kind of advanced back-end programming but don't want to actually get into something that a more structured kind of language. So you have the double problem of this kind of vulnerability and a lot of people who might be writing for it or administering it who aren't as up-to-date as they should be on developing secure applications or doing secure installs on a server.
Yep, very true.
Okay. Well, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was an Android drive-by situation that was reported just in the last couple of days by Lookout Security. Basically, a drive-by infection vector is just something that's on a website and the user can potentially be infected simply by browsing to that page. They don't have to do anything special on it, don't have to click on it or anything. And there have been some targeted Android drive-by kinds of things in the past, but this is the first one that has made it out into, other than a couple of niche really targeted attacks. And basically what happens is if you're browsing using your Android device, the built-in browser or installed one of the other browsers, Firefox or Opera or whatever, you go to this site, and it had an embedded iframe which would trigger a download onto your Android device. And if you have your device set to allow installation of applications from unknown sources, it will start to do an install of this Android application on your device. Now, you still have to, on the device, you'd still have to click on a button to allow it to continue. It isn't completely silent and in the background. But one of the application that it installs, it claims it's some sort of a security update. And what it really is a TCP relay proxy application, which would allow anybody to relay traffic, TCP traffic through the Android device on whatever Wi-Fi network it's connected to at the time. Probably would be difficult to do on the 3G or 4G network, but battery purposes, most of the time when I'm doing data stuff with my smartphone, my Android phone, I'm doing it on the Wi-Fi network here at my house, or one of the things that was noted in a couple of the articles in the last day or so discussing this is that this potentially opens up an avenue for the bad guys to use this proxy into or out of an enterprise. The specific DNS names that were identified in the articles were GAOanalytics.info, AndroidOnlineFix.info. Both of those were DNS names from which the applications were being served up. Both of those domains were registered on April 22nd, and both of them have since been suspended by the registrar for malicious activity. So this is a good thing that they got on that and knocked them down pretty quick. The name that was used for command and control, though, or one of them, the only one I've seen published, was notcompatible.app.eu, and as of early today, that one was still resolving to an IP address, supposedly in Utah. I don't know for sure how accurate that geolocation info is. So you may want to be watching for DNS queries for these names within your enterprise. See devices looking these names up, you likely have an infected device within your enterprise, and you need to go track it down.
Jim, are there any particular versions of Android which are vulnerable to this, or are there any that aren't vulnerable to this?
As far as I can tell, I haven't had a chance to look at a sample yet, but as far as I can tell, I'm not aware of any that aren't. It looks like it affects all of them. Now, as I said earlier, it requires that you have allowed apps to be installed from other than just the Google Play Android market, but it doesn't require any other special privileges. You don't have to have rooted your phone. Normal user, as long as they can install, click the install button.
Is there any indication of how word about these sites spread around? Like, I always wonder about this just because I try to keep on the straight and narrow ever since I started working with you guys. you've scared me into keeping my web browsing to a safe place. But something like Go Analytics, all misspelled .info, or AndroidOnlineFix.info, these things aren't coming up prominently in searches. How exactly are people getting drawn to these sites to take the download in the first place?
That's actually a good point. One of the ways that these were being devices were getting redirected to these sites were through hidden iframes in legitimate websites. In other words, the same way that a lot of drive-by attacks happen against PCs is some vulnerable website gets hacked, and they inject a hidden iframe into their main page, and that iframe contains the redirect to the site that's actually serving up the malware. And in fact, I saw a video. There's a video on YouTube that the guys at F-Secure showing this drive-by actually happening, and all they did was browse to a website for some music school that had the iframe injected into it. And you could see up in the bar at the top when the download started, and then did have to. The one good thing about this is it does require you to click OK or install. It isn't a completely seamless install yet. When the bad guys figure out how to do that, then we're in trouble.
Yep, definitely. I also wanted to point out there was a word on your previous slide. It was called not compatible, and it turns out that is the name of this malware.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that it's not compatible with something. It means that's the name of it. So I wanted to mention that.
Good point.
And I had also read, and I don't know how well you identified that, but basically that it looks at the user agent string when you go to these infected websites. And so if you're not browsing from an Android, then it won't try to do the download.
Yeah, and that's a trick that a lot of these malicious sites will use, is they'll target the drive-by malware at the particular type of devices, or the particular browser or whatever. So yeah, user agent strings are often used to determine what kind of malicious payload to send. Right.
And so also if there isn't an exploit for something and you're a security researcher or whatever, you're trying to investigate this, you go there, you don't see anything wrong if you browse there with IE or something like that.
Yeah, that's why it's a good thing that you can set the user agent string with wget to whatever you want. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Since Brian isn't here, we've got a very abbreviated Internet weather report today. This is our standard look at the Internet activity anomalies for the last 7 days. And we've talked about a lot of these in the past. TCP port 210, talking about for a few weeks, is right up there at the top. It's still going strong. Hopefully they're not finding lots of new webcams. But
they could be watching us right now.
They could be. But I did want to take a look, and I know that Brian had talked a little bit about this last week, but the TCP port 90, still not entirely sure what they're looking for, other than it appears to be they're looking for proxies, because the same guys who are doing these scans appear to be scanning on a lot of other proxy ports. But But as you can see here in the last week, we are still seeing quite a bit of this scan activity. So just want you to be on the lookout for it.
Is port 90 associated with anything?
It's not registered as any particular service. It has been used as an alternate HTTP port, 80, 81, 90, 8000, 8080, all of those. But we don't see port 90 used, consistently for much of anything, and we suspect that the guys that are doing the scanning are looking for open proxies just based on the other ports that they're also looking at. But that's just conjecture, and it is at this point in time it is limited to just a couple of sources. I don't remember exactly where they're located now, but it's just a couple of sources that are doing this. When Brian's back next week, we'll have the full-blown internet weather with all of the usual graphs. I didn't have a chance to put those together today, but I did want to take a look at this just.
Jim, just out of curiosity here, so when you have a situation like this, and you've got a port that's not really used for anything, you've got a couple sources, but they're scanning pretty aggressively on it, are there some techniques that you guys can discuss that you use to go about trying to discover the intent of the scanning? Well,
the first one, and I wish I had the rainbow graph that Brian put up last week, but the first one is to try to look at what other activity these machines that are scanning, what other activity we detect from them. And in the case of these have also scanned for a lot of other ports that are known to be proxy ports, 8080, 8088, 8089. That's one of the reasons why we guess that they're looking for the same kinds of things on other ports. Other than that, trying to determine what does normally live on a port. That's one other way of trying to determine it. If the particular port is used for a particular application that's well known, and it's a fixed port, that tends to lend itself.
Okay, but in situations like this where you have a port that's not traditionally used or is rarely used, what kind of things could attackers be looking to do by scanning on that port? I mean, so obviously, if there isn't an application, is there another way to get into a machine using a port that's not frequently used but isn't blocked? Like,
they're looking for something that's listening on a particular machine, and they have to have some sort of exploit for whatever the service is that's listening on that port. So they actually have to have an idea. And often what we'll discover is we may not have known what application it was that ran on that port when we first saw the activity, but in the course of investigating it, we'll discover that there is this particular application service that runs on this port by default or most of the time or often. And so they've got to, these guys doing the scanning must believe that there are a number of machines that are running as, in this case, we believe open proxies on this port. Otherwise, the scanning and finding a lot of closed ports isn't going to do them any good, even if firewalls traffic through to a closed port. You can't use that machine to turn around and...
Okay. All right,
and
Dave, what...
Sometimes it's one attacking group going after another. So it could be that some group that finds vulnerabilities in machines opens up port 90 to allow them remote access, and then this other group found out about that, and so they want to piggyback on that, and so they might want to get into the machines that other group has access to. I'm not saying that that's happening in this case, but sometimes that happens as well.
Yeah, of course. So all of this is speculation for this particular case because, like we said, we don't know for sure. But just it's interesting to try and understand why something that's seemingly unused and unimportant to pretty much everybody would all of a sudden be of intense attention by an outside group.
Right.
Well, if there's nothing else, then I will wrap this up and let you go with a relatively short show this week. Just want to remind you that we can be reached if you've got comments, questions, suggestions. We can be reached at CyberThreat at list.att.com. This webcast can be found on AT&T Tech Channel. That's techchannel.att.com. YouTube.com/ATT Tech Channel. The audio podcast can be found on iTunes. Just search for AT&T CyberThreat Report, or on FeedBurner. And some of us have Twitter feeds if you want to follow us. AT&T Tech Channel has a Facebook page if you want to follow us.
Dave, when are we going to get you on Twitter?
I don't know. One of these days I'll get there.
Anything else in closing, guys? If not, then on behalf of Dave and Dan and myself, thank you for joining us, and keep your network safe.